Hi everyone, and thank you for attending the Almonty Industries Investor Webinar. The company is currently undertaking a $15 to $25 million IPO as part of a listing process to join the ASX. Joining us to discuss the company and its leading position in the global tungsten market and its IPO plans is Lewis Black, Director, President and CEO of Almonty. A reminder to everyone that if you would like to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. These questions will be dealt with at the end of the formal presentation. Lewis, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you this morning, my time, and this afternoon, yours. So if we begin now, Colin's going to be going through this presentation, turning the pages. So Colin, if we could start, please, with the turning. I think we keep going until we get some information that's interesting. So essentially, what is Almonty? I think if we flick to the next page, we can really talk about that just briefly. We are essentially the last man standing outside of China. China accounts for 83% of the world's output of tungsten concentrate. We have developed over 5 generations. One of our mines has been running 126 years uninterrupted. Various technologies and approaches that have kept us Chinese cost competitive. We've obviously been in a rapid growth mode over the last 8 years to basically accumulate the projects that we feel have a future, culminating in this project of Shandong, which formerly was the largest tungsten mine in the world and is currently the largest tungsten mine outside of China. It's a brownfields project. It's fully permitted. It has a mine life of more than 90 odd years, and it has a grade roughly 3.5 times the average grade of an ordinary tungsten mine that you find outside of China and including China. What's also in place is the debt financing, which has taken the best part of 4 years to identify and close a financing that we felt would give the company the best possible chance. It's essentially a LIBOR plus 2.3% note with the German state bank of KfW IPEX Bank. It also has a 15-year offtake with a hard floor and no cap on the upside to ensure that if the unexpected happens in the future regarding the pricing, we are in fact assured of covering not only our principal interest, but also making in the ballpark of $10 million a year of free cash flow. We are considered within our industry to be the leading operators outside of China and one of the best in the world. Quite recently, the Almonty Group made an announcement declaring this. So with 5 generations of knowledge, this is a very difficult metal to process. We are very qualified to be making this next step. And I think finally, which is often overlooked but very important, is that this mine has taken 4.5 years to redesign to comply with the highest levels of international ESG standards. This is a requirement of KfW and of our customer and of their customers. And we face the reality that this is ultimately the future. You will see no surface disturbance at Shandong. And on top of that, by, well, complete luck, we are supplied 100% by renewable energy at the site, meaning that carbon neutrality is certainly an expectation that we have for the project in the medium term after commissioning. So essentially what we're doing here is we're moving now into an IPO for an ASX listing. We're currently listed on the TSX, as well as the OTCQX and in Frankfurt. But we've decided now is the time to move our primary secondary to Australia as we migrate the company eastwards. Ultimately, the focus of Almonty is going to be Korea. This project is of such a scale and such a size that it makes much more sense to have our team predominantly focused and based in Korea and ultimately look for a primary listing in Korea. But given the resource background and understanding of the supply chain issues that we all face, Australia is a fantastic new home for us. Colin, could have the next slide? Predominantly, this raise is focused almost exclusively at supporting the KfW $75.1 million loan for the building of the project. So I think this is all fairly self-explanatory. So I think this is worth spending also a few minutes on. Here you can see essentially at high level the structure and the kind of institutions and people that are involved with this. It's important to know that the shareholders, the largest shareholders in this, myself being one of them, and Planty Group, which is one of the largest private companies in Austria and the largest consumer of tungsten concentrate outside of China, have supported this in a way that has ensured that value has remained intact within the company. I think that in the greater scheme of things, this loan stacks up very well when compared to our peers, extraordinarily well. It's with a lender, which is KfW, who is considered to be one of the most conservative. They had their independent engineer Hatch go through us forensically because they said with their 100% track record of never having a bankruptcy or never having a default, they had no intention of starting now, especially with a small company such as ourselves compared to what they normally finance. So they felt very confident to go forward with this. And of course, the support of OAKB, the Austrian Export Credit Bank, has been paramount, as well as Planty and GDP. But I think that you can see that we have retained, as I said, much of the value within the business, and that ultimately is all to the benefit of shareholders, such as myself and all the shareholders. Colin, could I have the next slide? This gives you an idea of the capital structure on a pro-forma basis. I think it's self-explanatory, and of course, I don't know whether anyone's said, but this presentation is available from our website. Colin? These are really the dates. We're right now we've started the offering. We're looking obviously at closing at the latest 8th of July, but it looks like we're going to close probably earlier than that. And given if it's 8th of July, we should be trading somewhere in the middle of July. Colin? Colin, please. So I think that these slides are really talking about the production profile of Shandong. I think in a high level, we can basically just say that this will account for roughly 30% of non-Chinese supply and 7 to 10% of 7 to 10%. Sorry, I've got the sun. It's just risen and I'm being blinded. So let me just correct that. Could you just all hold up 1 minute? Right, sorry. It's like being interviewed under a bright light. So essentially, this is going to account for 7 to 12% of global supply. Colin, next slide, please. So we have, our profile is essentially in jurisdictions with real legal systems. This is a requirement not just of ourselves as a board, but also our shareholders and our customers. So we currently operate in Portugal. We have 2 further sites in Spain, and obviously this project in South Korea. Colin? This gives you an idea of shareholder structure. As I said before, myself, GDP, Deutsche Rohstoff are significant participants not only in this raise and also supporting the company to date, but also as the largest shareholders. Colin? This talks about essentially our Portuguese project. I think we can skip through these, but what I would say, and what's very important to understand about Panasqueira, it has been running for roughly 126 years uninterrupted. It has 5 generations of tungsten knowledge contained within it. It produces the highest grade tungsten in the world with the highest recovery rates of any gravity plant used in the world in tungsten. So it is a very unique site. Los Santos currently is in care and maintenance. We will look to reactivate that relatively shortly to reprocess the tails, as it has now come to the end of its life, but it's been instrumental in getting us to this point. And it essentially has been the finance to generate enough earnings for us to be able to sit here today and have not gone through a massive dilutionary event to finance Shandong. Colin? Valtrashal is the successor to Los Santos. Ultimately, it's 2 hours down the road, and we will reuse the plant from Los Santos at this project. Colin? And this gives you an idea of where we sit in the cost curves. Ultimately, you can see Panasqueira is in the higher end. It's an older mine, but it essentially makes a small amount of earnings every year, but it's the knowledge that we covet and that we will preserve while we require it for the build of Shandong and for the operations of Shandong. But you can see how Shandong sits very comfortably within the cost curve, and this is almost exclusively down to the grade. So I think in terms of tungsten, we could spend a lot of time talking about this. I think the most important thing to understand is it is identified by pretty much every Western and Eastern governments as being in the top of their 3 strategic metals. It is considered to be one of the, if not the most used technology metal that exists. It is used not just in EVs, in 5G, in semiconductors. It is an essential part of just about everything that you come into contact with within your life. And so ultimately, it is an extraordinarily important building block in the global economy. Colin? This gives you just a high level of the type of industries that it's used for. I think they're fairly self-explanatory. Colin? And again. So this ultimately is our peer group. I won't spend too much time on this. I think it's self-explanatory. Again, we have the advantage of being considered to be the best non-Chinese tungsten operators, and the fact that Shandong is, with grade and reserves, quite frankly, unique. So let's talk just briefly on Shandong. It's quite a project. It is a project that is almost legendary within our industry. It took us 9 months to acquire it in the middle of a time where people were panicking about the future 6 years ago. It was something which we'd always admired, we'd always wanted to develop. We felt that we were eminently qualified to do so, but its size and its longevity is such that it'll have a transformational effect on Almonty. There's no question about it. Colin? This gives an overview of the projections. Obviously, our offtake is for 45% of our output. The entire project has been modeled on 45% of the output. I prefer to get to a point where we reach what they call project completion, and then we look at, with our off-taker or with others, but predominantly our off-taker, with the balance of the 55%. But currently, the economics stack up very, very well just on this 45% of output. Colin? I think we've talked this. I mean, we're talking, this has an extraordinary mine life, which will almost certainly go past the 90 years, because we're only looking at 2 of the 10 mining areas that we have, and we know one of those third areas was already preliminarily explored by the previous, well, by the government and the previous owners 30 odd years ago, and they found in there large reserves of tungsten, high-grade tungsten. We have extraordinary process, tried and tested. It's currently used as well by Sandvik in their Austrian mine at Mitigation. So we have a technology that we know is reliable. It's far more predictable flotation than gravity, especially in the short term, meaning that we have obviously mitigated our risks significantly on ramp up. And I think as a consequence, given recovery, grade, and longevity, I think there is a fairly healthy expectation that will be highly competitive to China. Colin? So I think, to summarize Shandong, it's the largest mine outside of China. It's fully permitted. The financing was, the loan document, the loan debt was signed in December 2020. It's going to be a significant creator of jobs within the region. 90 plus years of production. The tax payments, South Korea runs not just tax credit programs, but all kinds of cash subsidies, which are already agreed or in the process of being agreed with the government. They're very supportive of this mine because it sits in an economic development zone, which is, there's only 3 of them in South Korea. This area was formerly the economic engine of the country back after the Korean War. It has seen better days, and I think the expectation is it will start to see them again. And as we said, in terms of the environmental aspects, this is going to reach a level that we've not seen in any tungsten mine that exists anywhere in the world. Colin? So this is essentially an outlook. We are looking Q4 for commissioning. This is a high level regarding the equated principles, which in America they refer to more commonly as ESG, but this has been a prerequisite of KfW, OAKB, and the Plancy Group and their customers. So it has been exhaustively designed into the project. Colin? High level ESG covers health and safety, impact on land and biodiversity, groundwater, surface water, waste rock, noise and vibrations. But I think this is a fairly, now it's becoming much more widely known that if you want to operate a mine in a safe jurisdiction, and you want to supply the best customers in the world, you now have to adhere to these standards. Colin? This is the team. I'd like to say they're a good-looking bunch, but that wouldn't exactly be true, some of them. But they all have extraordinary tungsten knowledge, and that is unique. On top of that, we are a team that's been together a long time. We don't have a turnover of people. All of these guys have the ability and are offered on regular basis better paying jobs. But tungsten is a passion for all of us. We do it well, and that is what we're going to be remembered for. Colin? I think this gives an idea of scale. Pictorially, it's easier to describe how big this deposit is than by just looking at data. Colin? So I think that, in terms of the risk mitigation, we've spent 4.5 years getting to this point. I'm not saying that something can't go wrong, but from running lock cycle tests on our process, having independence, as in Metso, with their performance guarantees, the EPC contractor and all these performance guarantees are locked with LDs, which are cash bonds, with the scrutiny of Hatch, KfW, the Plancy Group. I think that we are well prepared, as well as the fact that we've had a pilot plant on site for the best part of 18 months in operation. Well, currently we're operating it in Portugal because of the COVID restrictions that were existed in South Korea, and so our team returned home, but which was financed by the government in Korea. But a lot of groundwork has been done prior to construction start. Colin? This again is self-explanatory. Essentially gives you an idea of what we expect price scenarios to be looking at in the go forward situation. But we traditionally lag copper by 6 months, and there's no indication. Roskilde said there's no indication to see that there will be an increasing shortage of supply over the next 3 to 5 years, with the chances of new projects coming online outside of China slim. Given how long it's taken us to put this together sensibly, this is not an easy journey. Colin? Again, as we said, fully permitted. We have good performance and completion guarantees in place, supervised by KfW and Hatch. I think we're in a good place. Colin? So I think, in conclusion, we have a tier 1 project financing. We have a team an operational team that knows nothing else but tungsten, the largest non-Chinese producer, and we have a lot of support from our shareholders. Colin, I think that's it.
Lewis, thanks for a great presentation. A couple of questions have come through, but maybe to kick off from me, you talked to the tungsten experience of the board and management. Can you expand on that a little bit further as to to how wide and deep that experience is?
Well, I mean, if you look at our core operational team in Portugal, that mine's been running for so long, most of them are fifth generation. So whether it be metallurgists, geologists, mining engineers, mechanics, you know, I mean, in Portugal, we even run old-fashioned systems like apprenticeships. We still run apprenticeships because it's always been done for more than 100 years that way. It's the way that we've always trained the people. This knowledge has been passed on to the next generation. It means that there's very little that they haven't already, or their father or their grandfather or their great-grandfather hadn't run into and hadn't found a solution for. And for myself, I have more than 16 years in this. You know, I was previously chairman and CEO of Primary Metals, which at the time owns the Portuguese mine. And we were very, very successful in turning that mine around in terms of the rehabilitation of it, saving it from the edge, introducing systems that in fact made it a turnkey operation. And we saw our shareholders on our exit after 2.5 years, all of our shareholders make more than 20 times their money.
And in terms of the project itself, in the South Korean project, how do you get your hands on such a world-class project? And then what do you need to do in terms of operational and financing to get it to this point?
Well, I mean, I think the entire sector knows about this mine. It wasn't a secret. Everybody in our sector, both in China and non-Chinese, were very aware of how important this project was. This project originally was with obviously in its previous incarnation with Wolf, and they had a deal in place with ISCAR, which in turn is still owned by Berkshire Hathaway. We hadn't had any experience working with ISCAR. We'd always worked with Plancy, GDP, WBH, Bergbau, which is Sandvik, Sumitomo. And we had an opportunity, a very small window, where there was a bit of a wobble in the Canadian market. Money was difficult for them to come by. They owed a lot of money both to ISCAR and to Dundee. And Dundee, I think, were losing some confidence in the management team at that time. And that window opened. It was, I would like to say it was because we were smart, but in fact, in this instance, the timing was absolutely perfect. It took 9 months to work through how the deal was going to work so we could execute. But we were shown that opportunity and we took it because this is the big one.
And I suppose having a proven track record in tungsten development and mining would give confidence to the funding and other partners that you would have the capacity to, or the best shot out of anybody to bring this project into production.
Well, yeah, Dundee bit our hand off. I mean, because the reality is that we only know tungsten. And this was the first time they had anyone in their office who actually knew anything about tungsten operations. So suddenly, and the Korean government was the same. Suddenly, for the first time since '92, when this mine closed, there was a team that actually had tungsten experience and tungsten knowledge, real knowledge, not just, for a couple of years. We're talking, 100 years worth of knowledge, historically through Portugal. And so that, I think, gave everyone the confidence that this really now could happen.
And in terms of money spent to date, has the need, it's clearly an advanced project, has there been a significant expenditure to date?
Oh, yes. I mean, essentially, all of our other assets have been supporting this to get to this point. It was very important to maintain progress, not just in the redesign of the project, but also the project, the sterilization of the sites, the leveling of the site, currently the road and river, well, the road and drainage. They call it river in Korea, but it's not a river, it's a large drainage ditch, are all being diverted. The portals have been finished. We've spent somewhere in the region to date, not including acquisition costs, somewhere in the region of 18 to 19 million US. It was very important that this project started its rebirth on the correct footing, and therefore treading carefully and gently, making sure that that footing was strong was very important. This gives us the best possible chance of A, no surprises during the build or commissioning, and B, of success. And that's from an operator. That's how an operator looks at this. Better take your time than rush into a disaster.
Oh, well, yeah, a very valid point. And in terms of pricing, what have you done your studies at, and where do you think tungsten price may get to in the future?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we lean on groups like Roskill, because Roskill obviously, cover this area. I think that there is increasing demand for this metal, given this huge push towards more green technologies. And I think we're already seeing increases in demand even before the global economy fully opens up. And certainly we've seen from our customers, they're nice to us at the moment, which is normally indicative that they want something, which is the material. They're very nice to us anyway, but I mean, they obviously are very supportive, and that support has only increased in the last 6 to 8 months, I think is fair to say. And I think that probably tells me and anybody more about what the outlook is than even Roskills could tell you.
And for new investors looking at this for the first time, how important is it for them to understand the level of studies, the level of work that's being done, so as to mitigate any perceived technical risks that any investor looks at when a project's being developed? The work has genuinely been done here.
Well, I think the first thing, if a new investor, is to say, okay, so how much flesh have these guys got in the game? Well, I put, over $7 million of my own money into this. Friends of the family from the United States, they put in millions of dollars of their own money as well. No one is going to do this if we thought for a minute this was a story. But what was important, that when we did do it, that we then spent the work, or I spent the work, making sure this project is buttoned down. I mean, I was not in any hurry to start construction until I knew that I had the right financing, the right approach, everything had been triple checked. I don't want any surprises. I don't want any phone calls in the middle of the night saying, oops, because, this is my net worth. This is, and all of the management team have a lot of their own money in this. So we have a very vested interest to ensure this operates correctly. And I think Plant C and OAKB and KfW came into this with the view that they were not going to publicly attach themselves to this project if they thought for a minute this thing wasn't already buttoned down. So I think a lot of reputations have been staked on this.
You touched on before that a lot in the industry, particularly the tungsten industry, not just the resources industry, knew of the project and had eyed it off. How do they look at it now that you've got your hands on it? You've brought the partners in that are required to develop it. The money is coming together. How do they treat you and the project now?
Well, I mean, obviously the downstream sector of the industry is obviously very happy, because ultimately, and I think especially the Plant C group, in that there's now a viable long-term alternative, and they can further diversify away from China. So I think that's been very important to them. I can't speak for them, but this is what I certainly suspect. Obviously, our peer group, I mean, look, I think the success of this project will be beneficial to the entire sector. I think every project we have bought has worked. But this is the first one we build essentially from a brownfield. The good news is we're not inheriting someone else's problems. So I think generally there is a level of excitement about the opening of this project.
And in terms of reminding investors of future catalysts, what are the things over the next 6-12 months beyond the ASX listing should investors be looking for?
Well, I mean, obviously, one of the benefits of this mine is that it comes with an enormous molybdenum deposit, 150 meters under our existing infrastructure. So, which means it's in mining terms extraordinarily cost efficient to get into. So we have a vast amount of data on this resource as well. But ultimately, this is all historical because all the cores have long gone. So we are now doing the confirmation drilling. And we hope later on this year to publish a JORC report to be able to share the quite, well, I mean, it's a very comparable project to the Tungsten one. So that, I think, is certainly the hidden gem here.
And in terms of that, are you expecting sort of piecemeal type announcements around the moly, or are you expecting to sort of come out with a JORC resource of a suitable size all at once, or are you expecting to sort of start with a foundation and build from there?
Oh no, we're going to you know, as we progress, we'll keep all of our shareholders, as we always do, informed, so they'll know exactly what's going on. You know, if it's looking good, we'll go as far as we're allowed to say what we think, because obviously there's very stringent regulations regarding JORC reporting. But no, there won't be any, you know, there won't be a giant surprise later on in the year as we develop this, you know, forward. We will keep the market fully informed.
And so the moly clearly, in your view, is a positive to the story, and an opportunity for further upside that in some respects hasn't been factored in yet. Well,
I mean, South Korea is the largest consumer of tungsten per capita in the world because of the semiconductor business, but it's also the third largest consumer of moly in the world through the steel and shipbuilding business. So you have, for both metals, a voracious consumers on the surface. So I think the molybdenum mine, potentially, I would expect it to be a good win for us.
And in terms of sort of the global market for tungsten, how do you see this project playing into the market globally?
Oh, I think it's very significant. I think ultimately, you know, we've been a very significant supplier of tungsten concentrate for many years, but this project is at a whole different sort of level. We have no intention of downstreaming or competing with our customers. We don't know anything about that. We know how to produce tungsten concentrate. And I think that our customer, Almonty Group, has said publicly, this is a cornerstone of their raw material strategy for tungsten. So I think that the importance of this project will only continue to increase.
And people people often are concerned about China and its ability to impact price, supply and demand. But we're seeing a trend where now a lot of their own product is staying internally. They're not looking to sell it outside of China. Do you think that creates a positive opportunity for Almonty?
Well, in China, you can't export tungsten concentrate anyway. So it's a net importer of concentrate. They mainly buy out of the artisanals in Africa. But I think, look, I mean, China has developed their supply chain, their base, for the last 30 years. These guys are incredibly good operators. I mean, I think there's this image that they pay no money and it's all, you know, environmentally, you know, terrible. It's really not anymore. The cost of production in China is increasing every year. And they are incredible operators. We know them very well. We have a lot of respect for them. I think ultimately, the ability of Western customers to be able to source their own primary raw materials is going to only increase. You can't buy that from China. You can buy downstream, but that doesn't help customers who produce powders, which come obviously from the concentrate. So I don't think the impact of China is going to increase or diminish, but I think their costs are going to continue to rise. And I think diversification is a smart approach, not because it's some not anti-Chinese rhetoric, but because it makes sense to have, you know, not all your eggs in one basket.
Lewis, I think that's all we have time for today in terms of questions. Certainly a lot coming through. The IPO has clearly generated a lot of interest, and I know from talking to the advisors, there's a lot of demand coming in. A company steeped in tradition and experience in the tungsten market, with a strong foundation asset in Europe and a very, very exciting world-class asset in South Korea. It's an exciting time ahead for the company, and we look forward to seeing your ASX listing. I would remind shareholders or prospective shareholders that if they'd like to access a copy of the prospectus, they can do so by going to www.almonty.com, where a copy of the prospectus will be available. Lewis, exciting times ahead, and look forward to following the progress. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, David. Take care. Have a great day. Thank you very much.